Singapore city. He may in the future have fallen back even further, but for the history books, this is the last line of defense. So you get the Japanese moving in from the west coast. They take Bukit Timah Hill and they're driving in towards the city. They've got 4 miles from here into the centre of Singapore itself, and Percival had to mark a line in the sand, and he chose around this area.
So what kind of numbers do they have in the force in this?
Well, notoriously the Japanese outnumbered the British. Sorry, the British outnumbered the Japanese by 3 to 1. Yeah. So the numbers of forces involved. Well, notoriously the British outnumbered the Japanese 3 to 1. However, in isolated pockets, it was the other way around. So you find here that a division of the Japanese is heading down towards the north side of the Bukit Timah Road, and stopping them are about 3 or 4 battalions of British. Not a lot of troops. So you're thinking of battalions about 800 to 1,000 men. So not a lot. It's a thin khaki line in this particular area. And the Japanese are very good at finding the weak point, isolating the gap and going through it. And this is where Bucket Brown was the gap. It's the weak part of the line. It was the poor old 4th Suffolks had been fighting already. They'd moved into position. They hadn't dug in very deep. And they were a fragile eggshell in the approach to the city. So when the Japanese 11th Regiment, 5th Division, launched this attack across the road, there wasn't much opposition put up, and it was a pretty scary night for these lads. They thought they were dug in deep, they thought they could hold the line, and suddenly this Japanese force came out of the gloom, out of the darkness, with bayonets and swords flashing, and they just disintegrated and had to fall back through this kind of territory.
So can you describe to us some of the men from the British regiment who were fighting?
Yeah, well, the type of guys you would find in the 18th Division, they were, first of all, they were all volunteers. The British 18th Division, they're a territorial unit. So for the previous years, they'd been brought out from the farms and from the local towns in East Anglia. They'd been mustered. They'd spent a couple of years defending their own coastline against the threatened Nazi invasion, and that made sense to them. This was, their coast. They were going to defend it. And then the war changed, and then the Germans started to look at Russia and various other places. So the threat to the UK subsided, and then they went on to train, and they went up to places like Scotland, which is cold and wet and hilly, and then they went back down to Staffordshire. And for one summer, they helped bring in the crops. So they were in Britain getting ready to fight. And the theatre of operation they thought they were going to was the desert. They were going to Libya to fight Rommel. This is why they were all dressed in khaki and had all their summer uniform. So they all piled onto the ships. They couldn't just sail through the Mediterranean to get to the Middle East. They had to come all the way around the bottom of South Africa, stop off at India, and there they acclimatised. So you imagine these boys from the Suffolk farms and the Cambridgeshire farms coming in, and suddenly they're whisked to the other side of the world. They've been to Canada, they've been to Jamaica, Cape Town, and then they get to India, exotic India, and then they go into Egypt and the pyramids. But somebody, somewhere, decided, no, the 18th Division isn't going to go to the desert, it's actually going to go to Singapore. Now I know when you get to Singapore, you walk out of the Changi terminal, bam, you're hit by the heat, there's all these strange sounds, there's taxi drivers coming past, it's just chaos, and it's a completely different environment. So imagine what it must have been like for the lads getting off the boat at Keppel, having the same heat, having this confusion, the Japanese bombers bombing Keppel Harbour, and they were whisked off to the northern side of the island to defend an airfield into the mangrove swamps where there were snakes and insects, and you can hear them now. It's this environment. It must have been really weird. And then, to make matters worse, they were facing an enemy which they were told were useless and hopeless and couldn't fight in the jungle and couldn't see in the dark and this kind of thing. Suddenly they found that army had conquered all Malaya and they were coming after them. And there was no Dunkirk, there was no chance of getting off this island. This was the naked isle, this is the isle which there was no way of escaping. And they were told when they came off the ships, it's up boys, you're either going to be killed or captured. Great, but they still fought and the Cambridgeshire lads at Adam Park held their position. The Suffolks had a different story to tell here, but they still died and fought in these hills and trenches, even despite the fact they were on the other side of the world in a completely alien environment.
So how many were killed in this?
Well, the not many. It's not a bloodbath, this thing. It's not a massacre. It's not a last epic stand we're talking about. In fact, the Cambridgers said that their defence of the estate was normal. They really thought that they did what they were told to do. They took about 10% casualties out of their battalion. It's not big numbers, but it was kind of expected. So we're not talking about great losses of men. It was just this sense that everything collapsed so quickly, so tragic. The tragedy is not in the numbers lost, but in the actual 2 weeks and then you're in captivity. Looking ahead, what they didn't expect and what they didn't know about was the Thai-Burma Railroad and their 3.5 years in incarceration, which again is a tragedy of it, that this was just the beginning. This was the first act in 3.5 years of hell, working as POWs.
So I think we'll jump ahead to the possibility that if Percival hadn't surrendered, there was a chance of fighting the Japanese.
Yeah.
So what you said here just now. So
the research. Why do we do it? Is the archaeology actually adding to the story in the history books? One of the great questions which come time and time again is what happens if Percival hadn't surrendered? What happens if he said, no, I don't care about the citizens of Singapore, we're just going to fight on? In fact, what we'll do is every useless mouth we'll send over to the enemy. So have the population move to the north end of the island, get them to go, and we'll fight on. What would have happened? And we all know the story of Yamashita banging the table off of the old Ford factory, getting really riled with Percival because he's umming and ahhing about it. He said, look, you've got to surrender, you've got to surrender. And what Adam Park proves, and places like Mount Pleasant Housing Estate and the Gilman Barracks and places like that, was that there were pockets of British troops dug in to hillsides and housing estates, and they were holding their own. Adam Park took 3 days before they even thought about retreating. 3 days in a 7-day campaign. So things were slowing up the closer that the Japanese troops got into the centre of the city. Now imagine what would have happened if Percival had carried on. Well, the Japanese were running out of ammunition, they were running out of heavy equipment, they hadn't got all their stuff across from the Johor Strait. Literally the machine gunners around here had 20 seconds of ammunition left to launch any attack. The best thing they could do was a banzai charge because they didn't have the cartridges and the guns to be able to fire off around to support them during the daylight. What would happen if they had to take the rest of the town? And undoubtedly, I don't think Singapore would not have fallen. There was no rescue attempt. There was nobody magical 7th Cavalry coming over the horizon to rescue Singapore. But it would have taken a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even a month, maybe even 2 months. And for that, for Yamashita, first of all, the loss of face, he promised Singapore in time for the Emperor's birthday. But what happens with the rest of the campaign, heading towards Java, heading towards those oil fields, all that would have been disrupted. And maybe, just maybe, the course of the war would have been changed in a way which we don't know about, never knew.
So what other information have you found in your research here?
Well, I think the main thing we find in the research is you don't take anything for granted. When we've got all these diaries, the thing about World War II is it's a black and white war. You've got photographs, you've got cine films, you've got lots of diaries, you've got lots of accounts written in books, and you go down the shops and there's shelves and shelves of literature about World War II. We've also got the veterans as well, who you can still talk to, and we live in a special age when those veterans are disappearing. But it's what we're finding is you can't just take those things for granted. We're considered as battlefield archaeologists like the CSI of history. We find more evidence. And if they say there's a battle here, then we'll go and find the battle. And if they say that these guys were shot there, then we'll go and find that these guys were shot there. And we find the physical evidence. Maybe we find it, maybe we don't. But we add another layer of information to the history books. And with the loss of the veterans, the loss of the ability to speak to these lads and then to tell us where all the action took place and where was their trench, then once those boys have gone and you can't get that first-hand information, the next way of doing it is the archaeology. So it's adding another layer, another vision, another view of the fighting. It may tell you a completely different story, it may complement what you already know, but it adds that extra layer.
Mm-hmm. So what's the immediate short-term thing that you need to do?
Well, for Bucket Brown, first thing we like to do in Bucket Brown is to make people aware of that when the road does come through, then they're losing heritage. Not just the social heritage, but the wartime heritage as well. There's a wartime story to be told here. There are things under threat. There are those traces of archaeological evidence of World War II under threat when they bring the bulldozers through. And it's going to be very difficult for them to actually spot it in this landscape. It's also, on the reverse side of the coin, it's also an opportunity. Because when the road comes through, you'll clear away all the foliage. And then, maybe then, just for a brief few weeks, you'll see stuff which relates to the archaeology and relates to that story. I think the most heart-wrenching side of it is the missing guys. The guys who crawled out into the bushes here on the evening of the 14th in the pitch black with the wounds, and they were never seen again. There's no account of them. Their names appear up on the war memorial at Kranji. There's no graves for them. And they're out here still, we assume. Who's moved them, who's picked them up, where they're buried, we don't know. And the chance to actually find a couple of these guys, identify them, and get them named, and get their sacrifice known, and take them up to Kranji and lay them with their mates, well, that would be a sensational thing for us to find. Adam Park itself, well, we're still researching that. It's such a wonderful heritage site. It's not only a battlefield, it's a POW camp, and the artifacts are still coming out of the ground. There's still a lot of the real estate and a lot of the gardens we still need to look at, and that's just an incredible site. And every time we dig on that place, every time we do a survey on that area, the stuff that comes out is incredibly personal. Something new comes out every time. It's a fantastic heritage.
Mm-hmm. And you're also searching for marker 340.
Yes, marker 340 is a little carrot that's been dangled, an extra thing, and it's funny when you do the programs, when you talk to people and you do the presentation, every time there's another line of inquiry comes out. And marker 340 is exactly that. Somebody was looking through the archives, look at the burial records, and bam, you get an entry there which specifically says 4 soldiers. Is it still there? Are the lads still in the ground? Who were those soldiers? In theory, they could be some of those Suffolk lads who were brought together and buried in one site. We can't afford to ignore it. We've got to identify it. We've got to follow it up. And if there's a chance of finding missing soldiers, that would be fantastic. So yes, almost every month there's something else crops up. There's another avenue to explore and to add to that layer of knowledge and heritage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll take over. I've got a few questions. Sorry, I have a few more questions.
See, stimulating
Would you like a drink?
position. Fine, thanks very much.
No?
You're nodding. Quite good.
There was an ant that was crawling up and down.
Your body.
Yeah, there was an ant that was climbing up and down. It's a bit distracting just now.
Is
So.
he?
It's gone.
Is he gone?
Yeah.
Alright.
Well, that just goes to prove you can
It's done.
attract interest. No, that's not a good thing, is it?
You become
Yeah.
one with it. You become one with me.
Yeah, one with nature. Yeah.
Jason,
Archaeology at its rawest, out here, and there'll be a snake crawling across it. I did have a snake fall on me once. I was filming up at Adam Park, and I had the camera out like that, and this snake. I heard the rustle in the tree above me. I thought it was just one of those squirrels, and the snake fell like that. And I went, oh my God. So I've got it on camera. You can hear me swearing as the snake hit the ground here like this. And I did. By the time I got the camera down, pointing that way, the snake had gone. So nobody believes me. I tell the story.
It's alright, I believe you.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so basically I've got for about 4 questions. So it's more concerning Bukit Brown, the importance. First, start off the importance of it. Why losing Bukit Brown was equivalent to was one of the main factors that Percival actually incited the surrender. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, the importance of Bukit Brown as a military site. We've got to remember that the Yamashita was a pretty sly fox. He knew what he was up to. He thought that if he took Bukit Timah Hill, it would be all over. And at the point they took Bukit Timah, he sent aircraft over the city, dropped leaflets, said to Percival, look, you've got to surrender, don't be a fool, I've got the high ground, I can see everything, I can bombard it, give up. Percival said no. and he said, no, I'll fight on. So Yamashita had a next target. He had to force the hand now, and he would do so by capturing reservoirs, cut off the water supply. Now you've got to picture this. You've got this great big massive Japanese force sitting over in Bukit Timah, heart of the island. There are the reservoirs in front of him. But what's most important about the reservoirs are the pumping stations and the dam facilities, mostly on the side nearest the city. So he had to drive his troops towards the city, with keeping in mind that he's going to try and drive a wedge underneath the reservoirs to stop the water being pumped to the city. And surely, if he does that, Percival would then surrender, would he not? So that was his main aim. So suddenly, Bukit Brown becomes a significant site. This is the final stop line. It's the reservoirs just over there. If we can drive my tanks, drive my infantry through Bukit Brown, then I can Thompson and go up the Lorney Road and get to Thompson quick, cut off the water supply. Whether Percival really knew that and planned for that, well, perhaps not, because the poor old Suffolks who put up here had been fighting on Bukit Timah Hill. They weren't the best elements that he could throw into the line to stop the drive. And the Japanese did what the Japanese did the best. They found the weak link, drove through it. They sent them some of their best troops up here. Admittedly, they were running out of bullets. They drove the Suffolks off the hill, and they opened the way, perhaps not for the infantry to make it to Thompson, but more importantly to get tanks onto the Thompson Road to drive to the reservoir. And that's why Bukit Brown became a critical point in the line. It wasn't a big battle, it was only over quite quickly, like most of the engagements were, but it was such an important one because it turned the screw on Percival. So on the 15th, in the morning of the 15th, he was told, I'm running out of ammunition, I'm running out of this, running out of that. Oh, by the way, the water supply could be cut off. The Japanese never did cut the water supply off. The bombing cut the water supply, not the Japanese, but the threat was there. And that was the final thing that drove Percival up the road to the old fort factory. That's what's in his brain when Yamashita was banging the table.
So I think okay, I think that was great. Okay, we fast forward a bit now to the boys over here. That they were here. You told me that you told us that the environment was different and all this. But how did the cemetery, the unique way that the cemetery were on the hill, actually contributed much of the problems to the boys over here?
Well, yeah. What was the strategic? We talk about the strategic situation. Tactically, how difficult was it to take a hill like this? Well, actually, not too difficult if you just consider it as being a hill. And it didn't have all the foliage like we have around here today. A lot of it was grass covered, quite open terrain. It looked like on paper. But tactically, when the 5th Division looked over, they had a big problem. They wanted to use their tanks, but they couldn't use their tanks because the terrain around here stopped them doing it. And these tanks weren't massive, heavy King Tiger things that you saw at the end of the war. They were quite small tanks. And if you drive one of these things over, it tips over. It's like a turtle tipped over backwards, or the tracks won't get friction and the thing will get snagged off. What makes matters worse about around here is that a British infantryman with an anti-tank device, maybe a rifle, can hide out quite easily behind some of this concrete stuff, nip out, fire a shot, jump back into cover. So it's completely not suited for not tank country. So that's why you get the Ichikawa battalion storming across the road. The infantry, the poor old dog soldiers are going to have to do the job up here. On the other flip side of the coin, you've got these Suffolk lads being told to come and defend a hill. Well, it's not an ordinary hill. Psychologically, it's a little bit weird. It's a cemetery. You see in the diaries of the Japanese that they started off by thinking, should we actually attack a cemetery? Because of ghosts and things like that. It's bad omens for them. But then they got into it and said, oh no, we'll carry on. Imagine what the Suffolk lads are thinking. They're up here in this cemetery, a place filled with dead. Are they going to be dead next? And the complete environment, you can hear the insects, it's pitch black in the middle of the night. They're thousands of miles from home. They've never been in a Chinese cemetery in their lives. And they're told to dig in. Or how do you dig into this kind of terrain? Where's your fields of fire when you've got concrete all around you? There's places for people to hide behind, just in front of you. very difficult terrain, psychologically in the mind, playing mind tricks, that you're in the wrong place. You don't want to die amongst the dead. So yeah, it makes it really difficult. What did help them is when they did run, they had somewhere to hide. They could get away, sneak away in the dark. But even that, I mean, going to a cemetery at night normally is pretty scary, pretty spooky. But these boys were trying to hide from an aggressor who was going to cut their head off with a sword or bayonet them, and they were trying to make their way east. They didn't know where they were going. Where was east in this kind of environment? Not many of them had compasses, and when you're being chased, scary thought, scary thought. So as a battlefield, it's pretty unique, and especially for Singapore and perhaps in Southeast Asia, you're the only guys that the British actually were fighting in kind of this kind of terrain, which makes it an interesting problem, tactical problem for an infantry regiment.
Okay, so oh, sorry, the battery was off.
No problem.
It's good. It's good. That's great, actually. So the next question I'm going to move on is Catherine actually wanted to know, like, what are the sorry, give me a minute. What are the evidence that you have that a lot of boys were actually lost?
Okay.
Under the missing list and all this. What are the
Do you want
evidence?
to show the lists again? Because we got them down at the. I think did you get them down at the.
Yeah, it did.
Did you get close-ups?
No, we didn't.
Yeah,
we
so
didn't.
I was
We
wondering
can
whether I
get
can
them.
take some.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get them to you.
Okay,
We can
thank
perhaps
you.
get the originals.
That'd be good.
So basically, kind of skew, not really skew your answer, but to talk about the fact that a lot of history are here, and some of the missing boys are actually not found yet, and on top of the fact that the government actually wants to bulldoze their way over, and we are kind of really losing a huge, great archaeology.
Yeah, in one way it's a tragedy, but on the other way it's a bonus because you get an opportunity to look for them.
Yeah. Okay. So
okay.
that you can say also.
Yeah. Okay, ask the question again.
Okay, so much of the boys were lost here, according to you. I mean, the missing list and also. So talk about what kind of evidence do you have, and also and the next thing will be what happened if once the government actually trying to escalate their way through.
Yeah. So how do we know these guys are missing? How do we know? We know the Suffolks ran from these positions, but what happened to them? Well, after the fighting finished. There were work parties went out. A lot of the guys were collected together locally, and their padres and their doctors went out and went across the old battlefields and started burying them. And they would bury them into a situation where they know they could pick them up later. They knew that wasn't going to be the final burial spot for them, so they had to be accessible, and they should be able to mark them so they can be collected at a later date. They did it all in a hurry. They did it under the watchful glare of the Japanese guards. So there wasn't much time to go and process everything. But soldiers are very good at looking after their own, especially their dead ones, and they take great care of it. So you see all the records going through, and they would make a note, grade reference numbers of where everybody was buried and where the locations were. And then they had to send that to a central body, and that would be at Changi. And there was this Bureau of Records and Inquiries, and they collect all the information together. So there was an organisation, a military army organisation, which was recording all these graves. So what went wrong, because when you go up to Kranji and have a look, there's Suffolk graves, and there are loads of Suffolk still up on the wall. And surprisingly enough, quite a few of them on the 14th, 15th of February 1942. So why, in this urban environment, on an island which is well occupied and people going around these places all the time, why do we still get missing guys? Well, there's a number of ways you can actually go missing. As a soldier, you can literally disappear. You can disintegrate. You can be hit by a shell. There's nothing left for you to find. There's bits hanging from trees and things. So you can actually disappear, disintegrate. Alternatively, you could actually be wounded and you crawl. And when you crawl and move, you go to a place of sanctuary. You don't want to be found. So you go away and under a tree, under a bush somewhere, and then you die. And there's no chance. Nobody knows where you are. Another alternative is that it's not military people who find you. It's the locals who find you. A lot of the lads made it to local huts, and they were cared for by the Malay local families, and then they were perhaps because they didn't want to be discovered, and sheltering a British soldier, the soldier died, then they would bury them in the back garden. And they'll be too frightened to tell anybody that they helped this person, and there was and so the record was lost. And again, these guys went missing. And there's always the mistake, the paperwork mistake, the grid reference, which was wrong by so much, and the guys could just disappear. So even in a tropical urban environment where I'm here, in this city environment, bodies can still just absolutely disappear. So when we've got these records come through, and we find that half the names of the Suffolks don't appear as graves up at Cranji, but on the wall, then where are they? Where are the rest of these guys? Unfortunately, for the records for the Suffolks, they gave 6-figure reference numbers for the last known location, either of the grave or the man being seen. And then out of that, I think it's 40-odd guys actually on the hill here, on Bucket Ground, scattered around. So, when the road comes through, what we find is there is a chance, a small chance, that when they drive the road through, they will disturb the last graves of these war dead. Also, flip side of the coin to that one as well, is that maybe there's a chance that when they do bulldoze through, they spot them. And suddenly there's a grave that shouldn't be there because it's not marked up, and suddenly there's a pit of guys, and wham, you discover a whole bunch of fallen soldiers, which would be fantastic, because we can give them proper burial they deserve and get them notified and moved off, and next of kin can be informed. So among the civilian graves, we've also got this military presence as well. And it's an opportunity and it's a threat to when the road comes through to them and their memory.
Okay, I'm done.
Done.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you. That's great.
Excellent. Lost the light? You switched the sun off?
Yeah, he just Thank you, thank you.
他是可以拿走的卖哦。
可以。Yeah, thank you.
Go and take a photo.
Yep, I'll do that now. Can I have it? Yes, you can.